Well, in previous topic we discussed about the tap interface and vwire interface, and we understood about what is the use of those interfaces in different situation. Now in today's topic we're going to discuss about the layer 2 interface. Now you might be asking question like what is use of layer 2 interface on this Palo Alto firewall, right? Because layer 2 interfaces mostly we use on the switches, right? So let me give you one scenario. Let's suppose, let me clear this. Let's suppose we have VLAN 10 in here, which is belong to users VLAN, because users are going to use application from this VLAN. Now we have VLAN 101 for example in here, okay, and this VLAN belong to the web server VLAN, and this is one of the VLAN 102, and let's suppose this VLAN belong to an SQL VLAN. So what is going to happen basically when users would like to communicate with like web server, basically web server directly communicate with SQL server for its database. So users directly communicate with web server for using any application. Now let's assume there is no firewall in here, there's no communication between the firewall. This is basically going to be communication from the servers to the switch. So let's suppose there is a communication going from like this. So this is like VLAN 102, VLAN 101 and VLAN 10. Now on traditional switches, what happened basically when you have such VLANs on this similar switch, there is an inter VLAN routing happens on this particular switch. So any traffic would like to go to any other VLAN, they can go directly, there is no restriction. But if we want to restrict the traffic on switches, we have ability to, we can create an ACL, which is access control list, right? So you can create an ACL on this particular VLAN where you can restrict traffic that users from VLAN 10 can communicate with certain servers. Like there is like 20 servers in here, but we want users to communicate only the 2 web servers, right? They should not be communicating with all 20 servers. So that is the access list you can create. Now you still might be asking the questions, well, we can control traffic by using ACL, so what is still use of this Palo Alto firewall, right? Now the problem with ACL is they work upon layer 3 and layer 4. What that means is they basically work upon the IP level restriction and port level restriction. So it could be like TCP, UDP, or maybe some protocols, but they do not have the visibility based upon the application. Like we saw in our earlier videos, we can control the traffic based upon the application on this Palo Alto firewall. So if you have like a huge company or banking sector, you would like to control the traffic. Let me clear the screen. So you would like to control the traffic if the user is passing, for example, VLAN 10, 101 and VLAN 102, right? So if you would like to control the traffic, if the user is coming from VLAN 10, would like to go to VLAN 101, on this firewall you can specify which are the application you want users to pass to VLAN 101, and you can have those kind of control by using the policy. Even VLAN 101 can communicate with VLAN 2 on specific port or maybe application. So that is something, you know, you can have these restrictions or policy handling on beyond by using Palo Alto firewall. But this apply with the, you know, if you have like a huge budget and you would like to control the traffic for layer 2 perspective only, then you can use Palo Alto firewall. Now let's talk about certain issue with this kind of design. So what will happen, for example, these interfaces basically is communicate between the firewall. They are going to be either 1 gig port, or if it is like a fiber, then might going to be a 10 gig or maybe, you know, a little bit higher bandwidth. Now let's assume all these interfaces might be using 1 gig or depend upon your firewall model. If you have like a higher model, you might be having the fiber link, right? So the problem here is, for example, if this link goes down or this link might goes down, you might going to have a problem, right? So you must be having some kind of redundancy. So first problem is come as a, you need to make sure there is a redundancy, right? I'm sorry for my spelling mistake. Now the second problem is like bandwidth. So what is happen if suppose you are going to use copper link, it is going to restrict until 1 gig interface. So if the users are keep sending the traffic back and forth, then there might be some bandwidth you might be requiring with this firewall. So the two main issue I see here regarding the redundancy and bandwidth. So you might be saying, well, we can solve the redundancy problem, so we can run the multiple cables in here and we can have, you know, some redundancy issues solved. Now what if this firewall goes down? So it's going to be again the problem with the redundancy, right? So you need to use another firewall. So what you might gonna do, you're going to put one more Palo Alto, you're going to run multiple cables. So it's going to involve a huge budgeting if you are designing this kind of thing. So if you have those kind of budget, then this is really nice design to restrict the traffic based upon the layer 2 within your own infrastructure. So that is something, you know, basics about you can design as per the layer 2. Now let's go on firewall and configure the layer 2 interface. Okay, well, in order to configure layer 2 interface type on this Palo Alto firewall, all we need to do is we need to select that particular interface. For example, Ethernet 1/3. This is going to be the part of our user VLAN. So let's give some name in here like user VLAN 10. Okay, now the next is going to ask us interface type. So this is, of course, this time is going to be layer 2, right? And we are not going to use NetFlow. Now it is going to ask us, okay, what is your VLAN? So let's create or apply some VLAN name in here. So this is going to be VLAN 10 because this is for the user VLAN, and just press OK. Now the next is security zone. So we need to create security zone because we are going to control the traffic, right, based upon our application requirement. So we're going to create like a user VLAN zone, for example. Okay, so we have created the VLAN, we have created user VLAN zone, and just press OK. So we have configured one of the interface belong to user VLAN. Now let's go to 1/4 and configure this for the web server VLAN, for example, and it's going to be VLAN 101, right? And then layer 2 interface. Now let's go to VLAN, create one more VLAN, which is VLAN 101, and then let's go to security zone, create one more zone, web server zone, and everything is done. Okay, now if you want, you can also keep creating all these segment or the VLANs you are going to configure on this Palo Alto firewall, right? So let's keep like 2 VLANs just for our understanding, and let's assume we have created all those required interfaces and we have configured all the interfaces belong to certain VLANs. Now let's do one thing, let's go and configure the policy based upon these 2 VLAN, right? Now for our demo purpose, let's consider this network belong to Facebook, and you want this server, which is the web server which is running this Facebook application, and you want users can only communicate with Facebook application. So this is going to be the part of VLAN 10 for the user VLAN, right? And this is the part of VLAN 101 we created for the web server VLAN. So what we're going to do, basically we're going to restrict traffic coming from VLAN 10, and it should only access the Facebook application. It could not access the other application or the port. Maybe they could not access any SSH or telnet activity, just they can access the Facebook application. Now let's control this traffic on Palo Alto firewall. Since we have already created the required zone or the VLAN belong to user and web server, now we need to go into the policies and we need to create some restrictions. So let's create one of the policy and let's call it as a Facebook for user VLAN, right? And then we need to define what will be your source, and here you need to select user VLAN, and then destination is going to be your web server VLAN. You can define as a Facebook as well as a zone. Now the next is application. Now here you can control which is as a Facebook, so we need to search for Facebook, and once it appears we need to select that application in here. So let's see Facebook, and it is going to be the part of like any ports, but if you want to restrict on port, you can also define in here as an HTTP and HTTPS only, and action would be allow. So that is something we can create the policy where we can restrict the traffic based upon application. But if we had this switch in here, for example, if we had switch, right, and if all the VLANs were connected like VLAN 10, VLAN 101, 102, so anybody can communicate with anybody. Even we created the ACL. On ACL we can only control the traffic based upon the IP and the ports, right? So if we are going to open the port based upon the 80 and 443, but still we may not control the traffic based upon application. So that is something you can control the traffic based upon application, even though by using the layer 2 interface type. So that is a good use of layer 2 interface type. By dividing into segmentation, then you can control the traffic based upon the application or based upon source and destination, or maybe by using the user ID as well. So that is how we can control the traffic on Palo Alto firewall by using different segment called layer 2 interface. So this is for now, and I'll see you in the next section. See ya.